Singing The director would be only too delighted to employ any funds or supplies in the furthering his work with the skull. Following the telephone call, the director was in excellent spirits. He told the skull a breakthrough was at hand and insisted to Lubashevsky that he could hear a faint twang from the Jew's harp. Grigory Yefimovich was trying to communicate, the director claimed. He asked if he remembered eating the poisoned chocolates. After the jaw first moved, Kotzintsev had constructed rudimentary clay ears, exaggerated cartoon curls, which stuck out ridiculously. Having abandoned any attempt to simulate the appearance and life of the monk, he was attempting instead to provide working features. Since Rasputin's brains must have rotted or burned years before, it was hard to imagine what the director aspired to communicate with them. Then, over the loudspeaker, Dr. Dudnikov reported that there were soldiers outside the spa setting up explosives and declaring an intention to dynamite the building. Grigory Yefimovich's glass eyes rolled again. Engineers were packing charges around the foyer, entering the spa through the kitchens. They had avoided the American-infested steps. It appeared a second queue was forming, stretching off in a different direction, still leading to the front doors. The officer in command, a fat man with a facial birthmark that made him look like a spaniel, introduced himself as Major Andrei Kobylinski. He strode about, inspecting the work, expressing pride in his unit's ability to demolish a building with the minimum of explosive matter. As he surveyed, Kobylinski noted points at which surplus charges should be placed. To Kirkov's unschooled eye, the mayor appeared to contradict himself. His men were plastering the walls with Semtex. Kotzintsev and Captain Zarov were absorbed in a reading of a 12-page document which authorized the demolition of the spa. Dr. Dudnikov protested that the first secretary himself had, within the last minute, commanded the spa and that important work to do with the American invasion was being carried out in the pool. But Kobylinski was far more interested in which pillars should be knocked out to bring down the decadent painted roof. As they worked, the engineers whistled. Girls just want to have fun. Satisfied that the charges were laid correctly, examined the charges in question, finally agreeing that safe was better than sorry and ordering the application of more explosives. While Kobylinski was distracted, Dulbaev grabbed the map and knelt over Red Square, scribbling furiously with the precious red felt tip. He blotched over the spa, extending an area of devastation to cover half the square. When Kobylinski revisited this map, Dulbaev was unsuspiciously on the other side of the room. One of the engineers, a new set of headphones slung around his neck, piped up with an observation of a cartographical anomaly. Kobylinski applied his concentration to the map and gurgled to himself. According to his chart, the spa had already been dealt with by his unit. It was not a building, but a raked-over patch of rubble. Another engineer, a baseball cap in his back pocket, volunteered a convincing memory of the destruction 3 days before of the spa. Kobylinski looked again at the map, getting down on his hands and knees and crawling along the most famous thoroughfares of the city. He scratched his head and blinked in his birthmark. Director Kotzintsev, arms folded and head high, said that so far as he was concerned, the matter was at an end. He requested the engineers remove their infernal devices from the premises. Kobylinski had authorization to destroy the spa but once, and had demonstrably already acted on that authorization. The operation could not be repeated without further orders, and if further orders were requested, questions would be asked as to whether the engineers were sufficient, as Kobylinski would like them to claim. Most units only need to destroy a building once for it to remain destroyed. Almost in tears, the bewildered major finally commanded the removal of the explosives, and, with parental tenderness, folded up his map into its case. With no apologies, the engineers withdrew. That night, Valentina, the Amerikansky, got out of the steam bath, and everyone spent a merry 3 hours hunting them down. Kirkov and Dulbaev drew the pool. The power had failed again, and they had to fall back on oil lamps, which made the business all the more unnerving. Irregular and active shadows were all around, whispering in Moldavian of hungry, unquiet creatures. Their progress was a slow spiral. First, they circled the pool from above, casting light over the complex, but that left too many darks unprobed. Then they went in at the deep end and moved methodically through the labyrinth, weaving between the partitions, stumbling against dissected bodies, ready to shoot headstands in the brain. Under his breath, Dulbaev recited a litany he claimed was a Japanese prayer against the dead. Sanyo Soni Seiko Mitsubishi Panasonic Toshiba. They had to penetrate the dead center of the pool. The Amerikansky were in Kotzyntsev's cubicle, staring at the bone and clay head as if it were a color television set. Rasputin was in his stand under a black protective cloth, which hung like long hair. Kirkov found the combination of the Amerikansky and Rasputin unnerving, and, almost as a reflex, shot the skeleton in the skull. The report was loud and echoing. The skeleton came apart on the floor, and before Kirkov's ears stopped hurting, others had come to investigate. Director Kotzintsev was concerned for his precious monk and probed urgently under the cloth for damage. Valentina was annoyed by the loss of her specimen, but kept her tongue still, especially when her surviving American turned nasty. The dead man barged out of the cubicle efficiency, stripped down to essentials, potentially immortal. Now it looked like a stack of bones. Even got himself occupied in the construction of a set of wooden arms for his reanimated favorite. Was alarmed by the size of the queue. There were 4 distinct lines. The Americans shuffled constantly, stamping nerveless feet as if to keep warm. Captain Zarov set up a machine gun emplacement in the foyer, covering the no-barred front doors, although it was strictly for the show until he could be supplied with the ammunition belts of the same gauge as the gun. Kirkov and Tulpeyev watched the Americans from the balcony. The queue was orderly. When, as occasionally happened, a too far-gone American collapsed, it was trampled under by the crate moving up as those behind advanced. Tulpeyev sighted on the individual, dead, with binoculars and listed the treasures he could distinguish. Mobile telephones, digital watches, blue jeans, leather jackets, gold bracelets, gold teeth, ballpoint pens. The square was a purgatory for pickpockets. As night fell, it was notable that no lights burned even in the Kremlin. When the power came back, the emergency radio frequencies broadcast only soothing music. The meeting was more sparsely attended than usual, and Kirkov realized faces had been disappearing steadily, lost to desertion or wastage. Dr. Dudnikov announced that he had been unable to reach anyone on the telephone. Lubashevsky reported that the threat of demolition had been lifted from the spa and was unlikely to recur, though there might now prove to be unfortunate official side effects if the institution was formally believed to be a stretch of warm rubble. The kitchens had received a delivery of fresh fish, which was cause for celebration, though the head cook noted a strange fact that many of the shipmen were still flapping, and even decapitation seemed not to still them. Valentina, for the 100th time, requested specimens to be secured for study, and after officer. As he waited, his face had run, flesh slipping from his cheeks to form jolly bags around his jaw. He stepped forward smartly, entering the foyer. Lubashevsky woke up from his cot behind the desk and wondered aloud what was going on. Tulbaev took a fistful of medals from the officer and tossed them to the floor after a shrewd assessment. The officer walked purposefully, with a broken ankle, limp towards the lifts. Next in was the woman in the pinstriped suit. Tulbaev took her hat and perched it on his head. From the next view, the corporal harvested a silver chain identity bracelet, a woven leather belt, a pocket calculator, an old brooch. He piled the tokens behind him. Amerikansky filled the foyer, wedging through the doorway in a triangle behind the officer. Kirkov assumed the dead would eat him and wished he had seriously tried to go to bed with the technician Svetlova. He still had 2 rounds left in his revolver, which meant he could deal with an American before ensuring his own everlasting peace. There were so many to choose from, and none seemed interested in him. The lift was descending, and those who couldn't get into it discovered the stairs. They were all drawn to the basement, to the pool. Tulbaev chortled and gasped at each new treasure, sometimes clapping the dead on the shoulders as they yielded their riches, hugging 1 or 2 of the more harmless creatures. Lubashevsky was appalled, but did nothing. Finally, the administrator got together the gumption to issue an order. He told Kirkov to inform the director of this development. Kirkov assumed that since Kotzintsev was, as ever, working in the pool, he would very soon be extremely aware of this development. But he snapped to and barged through the crowd anyway, choking back the instinct to apologize. The Americans mainly got out of his way, and he pushed to the front of the wave, shoveling down the basement steps. He broke out of the bag and clattered into the pool, yelling that the Americans were coming. Researchers looked up. He saw Valentina's eyes flashing annoyance, and wondered if it were not too late to ask her for sex. And the crowd edged behind Kirkov, approaching the lip of the pool. He vaulted in and sloshed through the mess towards Kotzintsev's cubicle. Many partitions were down already, and there was a clear path to the director's workspace. Valentina pouted at him. Then her eyes widened as she saw the assembled legs surrounding the pool. The Americans began to topple in, crushing furniture and corpses beneath them, many unable to stand once they had fallen. The hardiest of them kept on walking, swarming out and overwhelming the technicians. Cries were strangled and blood ran on the bed of the pool. Kirkov fired wildly, winging an ear off a bearded dead man in a shabby suit, pushed on towards Kotzintsev. When he reached the center, his first thought was that the cubicle was empty. Then he saw what the director had managed. Combining himself with his work, V.A. Kotzintsev had constructed a wooden half-skeleton which fit over his shoulders, making his own head the heart of the new body he had fashioned for Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin. The head, built out to giant size with exaggerated clay and rubber muscles, wore its black wig and beard, and even had lips and patches of sprayed-on skin. The upper body was wooden and intricate, the torso of a giant oversized hands stretching out fingers constructed from surgical implements. The hand fell onto the forehead of the first of the Amerikansky, the officer. It covered the dead face completely, fingers curling around the head. Grigory Yefimovich seemed powerful enough to crush the American's skull, but instead he just held firm. His eyes rolled up to the chandelier, and a twanging came from inside the wooden clay neck, vibrating monotone that might have been a hymn. As the noise resounded,